this is, as you all know, we do this usually about once a year, and it's always one of our best attended and most popular programs, because I know most of us serve on some nonprofit boards in the community, and we know how important the nonprofit sector is. So I'm going to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our other two panelists, but we have a great panel for you. It's particularly great for me to be able to introduce Kim Sterling. Many of you know I was at the zoo for a number of years. When I first joined the zoo, we were at the beginning stage of a capital campaign, which we went through, and over the next 7 or 8 years, I kept hearing the name Kim Sterling. And we had not used her earlier. And I heard it from donors, I heard it from board members, I heard it from other community leaders. I kept hearing her name. So when we started thinking about another huge campaign, I thought, well, I need to go meet this person. So I went over for what I thought was a perfunctory 30-minute conversation and walked out, I think about 2 hours later, just completely wowed by her. And in looking this morning, as she came in, I noticed a number of you going over to see her, so I know you were equally wowed by her. But Kim is very unique in that she brings tremendous strategic vision to her clients. She's very creative, she's very enthusiastic and energetic. She's a great person to have on your team. And so we hired her, and I got to work with Kim for 2 years and found that not only is she great at advising clients, she's a great consultant, but she's a great partner for our organizations. So I'm thrilled she's here. She actually grew up in Bangkok, so we're really lucky that she made it to Houston. And Kim is going to introduce our great panelists. So please welcome her.
So I'm really happy to be here, and it was fun to see some people that I knew this morning, because I really have had a great privilege to work with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of good people. But this morning, I get to introduce two exceptional people, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then we'll get into what's going on in nonprofits in Houston. You can read their bios in your packet, but I'm not going to read that to you. I'm going to tell you some other things that you might not know. And the good thing about having Steve Loughborough and Renee Wizig-Barrios here with us today are that they represent the two beautiful sides of the nonprofit sector in Houston. They represent the cause, and they represent the donor, the givers. And so putting them together this morning gives us a chance to look at the whole. Steve comes from the perspective of the cause, and what a perspective he brings, because you might or might not know that the typical nonprofit CEO lasts in their job less than 5 years, less than 5 years. Steve has been at Goodwill Industries for almost his entire career, and that is almost unheard of. And that kind of continuity has given that organization great strength. He has led that organization through really a period of great change and growth in their business model, and you hardly ever see that kind of transition and transformation occur in the nonprofit sector. He took Goodwill from being a well-known organization driven by charitable contributions to an even better-known organization that is really driven by earned revenue. And because I think most of you are in the private sector, you understand that it takes money to run a business, and he figured out how to do that with his board of directors. If you've ever dropped anything off at a Goodwill site, used clothes, pots and pans, whatever it is, you've probably been greeted by just lovely people who are there gaining skills and learning the opportunity to be self-sufficient. You might have seen how those contributions get used, but you might not have seen the impact of sales revenue on Goodwill's bottom line. Bill Casales here, he saw this change too, because he was chairing the board during this time. Steve really knows how to run a business, and he also knows how to raise money, because he led a really significant capital campaign a few years ago for their new home, Job Connections in Stores. So he's running a $100 million business. But he's got this huge heart. So we're really lucky to have Steve here. And then on the other side of the fence, we have Renee. And Renee brings us the perspective of the strategic philanthropist. We'll talk a little bit today about the size of the nonprofit sector and how donors find their cause. And she gets to work with hundreds of strategic philanthropists every year, individuals, families, corporations, private foundations, and many of them use the platform at the Greater Houston Community Foundation, and that is where she serves as the Senior Vice President. For almost 20 years, the GHCF has expanded its philanthropic impact with donors, and it has now assets of almost $560 million under management, which is really tremendous. And just last year alone, they distributed $112 million worth of grants. That's her job, to help make that happen well. So she is here to talk about New Age philanthropy. She is an expert on that topic, especially because she knows a lot about the way people give away money and the way that perhaps they should think about making decisions about the way that they invest their philanthropic contributions. This is an important process. There are more than 1.5 million nonprofits in the U.S. There are more than 100,000 in Texas and more than 20,000 in Houston. And so the choices need to be made well. So I think she would tell you the best preparation for her job was the experience that she gained working in the nonprofit sector. She took that to the other side to help donors make good decisions. And I'm going to share just a little bit of background about the nonprofit sector, and then I will take my seat and ask our panelists some questions. This is a slide that just shows you how much money is being given to philanthropy in the United States right now. Just last year alone, excuse me, more than $358 billion flowed into the sector. I mentioned a minute ago that there are 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the U.S. and how many there are in Houston and in Texas. The nonprofit sector represents 5.5% of gross domestic product. It is not this little thing that's happening out there on the side that's cuddly and cute. It's a big business. It employs a lot of people. It represents 10% of all American jobs, 9% of all American wages. More than 400,000 Texans are employed in this sector, and there are multiple revenue streams. So the revenue stream that we're looking at here is contributed income. So the bottom line is that nonprofits are businesses, and some of them are really big. Some of you work for them or are on boards of those larger ones, and some of them are small. But the bottom line is they're businesses, but they just have tax-exempt status. And so that is something that people don't really think about unless they're running one, right, Steve? So the interesting thing about this slide is not how many dollars are in there, but it's the fact that 80% of the money that goes into the contributed revenue that nonprofits receive comes from individual people, 72% while they're alive, 8% after they're not with us anymore. And that is a lot of revenue. The typical American, by the way, gives about 2% of their income to charity. When you itemize your deductions on your tax return, you might or might not really think about what that is. But we can consider, what if it were 3%? How much more work could we do in the world? So where does the contributed revenue go? It's very split up. About a third of the money that comes in the nonprofit sector goes to houses of worship, churches, synagogues, mosques. Another 15% or so goes to education, and for whatever it's worth, the majority of that is higher education. It's alumni giving. You might have seen the news that came out this week that Harvard and Stanford both raised $1 billion each last year. So not as much for pre-K to grade 12, although we think about that a lot in our city. And the remainder is very fragmented. And the interesting thing is that the way this pie is sliced up remains remarkably consistent from one year to the next. So there's sort of this disciplined way that money flows in. People know what they care about. They tend to give to it consistently. I wanted to share just two quick trends let me show you one more thing. This is how the Greater Houston Community Foundation distributed its funds last year. And Renee can share more about that. But it tracks pretty closely with the way all the national money goes. So just two comments about trends that I wanted to mention, and then we'll get into our questions with our panelists. 70% of all the money today is given by people who are probably in the generation that we are in this room today, baby boomers and their parents. Baby boomers and their parents tend to look backwards on their giving. They want to know, did you do a good job with what I gave to you? So I will give you more if I'm happy with what you've been doing. What did you do with my last gift? We tend to be more loyal to organizations, and that has been a profound thing as the nonprofit sector has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. Generation X and Generation Y are shaking it up. They've really changed the landscape. And anybody who's involved in nonprofits is sort of thinking about that. What does that mean? The generations that are coming up behind the baby boomers and all the way back to the millennials are much more focused on the future. What are you going to do? What kind of impact will you make? They're very, very focused on measurable change. And so that has a big impact on the way that we communicate with our donors because they're looking for different things. And the second thing of interest in Texas, especially Houston, and I'm just going to touch on this quickly, is the impact of the price of oil on philanthropy. Everybody is worrying about this. It has been a big topic. And I'm going to say something surprising, and that is that the answer is very little. This is the slide that shows the price of oil over time. Up, down, up, down. It's gut-wrenching. I'm sure many of you look at this all the time. This is the way philanthropy has grown. It just goes up. In 2008 to 2009, when the economy just cratered, charitable giving dropped about 6%. And then it recovered and it kept going up. So I'm really here to deliver a word of reassurance to any of you who are on nonprofit boards who are worried about what's going to happen. You should just keep going. Giving tends to really remain quite steady. It does not fall through the floor. And so we can't react at times like this. We need to just keep going. And people who give tend to keep giving unless they're unemployed. And then we see a shift from the arts over to human service. So that's all that I have to say about this. And I'm going to sit down and ask some questions to our panelists who have a lot to share. So Steve, what changes have you seen over the last 5 years in the role of nonprofit directors?
What a great question, because as I look around the room, I know there are people here who serve on not-for-profit boards, but I also know that we have not-for-profit leadership in this room too. And so I have to be very careful how I answer these questions. And I have several of my board members here as well, so everything I say is going to be politically correct. But the changes that I have seen, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. And Bill Cassell and I have worked together a long time. Bill's a member of this group. And we always say that in the past, our board members were great. But it was there for more of, they came for breakfast. We kind of reported out what was going on, and then they went home. We have seen a huge change, and I know that the other not-for-profits are experiencing it as well. Boards are now engaged. Boards need to be engaged. Boards have fiduciary oversight and responsibility. Boards have governance that we never thought about 25 years ago. Boards want to be proud of the organizations that they serve on. And I think that's really a key. So that raises our bar as the not-for-profit leadership, but it also raises the bar of the people that come into our board as board members. And so the changes have been huge. Accountability, oh my. They hold me more accountable than I had ever been held in the past, which is a good thing some days. It's a good thing on most days. But in the past, it was kind of like, just go ahead and run it. And it's hard as a leader to take that change, Kim. I mean, it really is. But I've had a board that has kind of worked with me, and I think we've all grown together in this new style. So I hope that answered your question.
Fantastic. Renee, do you have anything?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. One other trend I think that we're seeing is that some nonprofits still have really massive boards and small executive committees, and that works for them. But certainly there is more of a trend towards going to one fiduciary oversight board without an executive committee. When I got to the Community Foundation, that had already happened before I arrived, and it was amazing. Our board is capped at 18, and that means that those 18 people really do have to engage. Their presence matters, their decisions matter, the accountability. And so it's a real different dynamic when in the boardroom, that's where the decisions are being made. Board members aren't coming to rubber stamp what a few people have decided. And so I think that's a really interesting trend to watch. Now, the challenge with that can be what happens with the advisory committee. We have a community foundation council of more than 100 people, and quite honestly, we're always still trying to decide what's the best way to engage that advisory group. Some really are hands-on and engaged, some we don't see, and so I think that's the challenge as you move to that kind of a board versus advisory committee relationship. But in terms of the dynamic of getting the work done, a smaller board that really has oversight and engagement's really needed, I think is the way to go.
Thank you both. And Renee, another question for you, since you're on a roll here. We hear a lot about transformational giving. The word transformation is everywhere. What do you think that really means? And how do you see that approach, if you can define it, playing out in Houston?
You know, I think it's a really exciting time in Houston because there is a lot of transformational giving going. And different people would define that differently. To me, transformation is about impact. And truly, the best gifts transform the donor and the institution or the cause with which they're working. So I could give lots of examples. I'm going to focus on a couple of stories that I think will help give you a picture. One that really inspires me is Molly Gotchman and the work that she's been doing on human trafficking. So I've been working with Molly for 4 years now. She's an artist and an activist and a donor, and she came into this with this incredible hunger to learn about the issue. And people who want to make transformational gifts need to be interested in learning because these issues are complex and you don't figure them out in 1 or 2 days. So she has deployed every kind of capital that she has. It's not just grants. Her grants have been incredibly impactful. One of them is transforming the foster care system for the entire state of Texas. Another example is she is the first U.S. donor to the Freedom Fund, raising $100 million to fight human slavery all over the world. But she is also mobilizing her investments. She's doing impact investing. Her donor advised fund is screened for human trafficking related supply chain issues. All of her personal investments are screened that way. She's engaged in shareholder activism. But she's also an artist. That's her career. So she created this project, the Red Sand Project, which is about taking red sand and putting it in the cracks of sidewalks to expose people to thinking about who are the people who fall through cracks in our society. Through social media, that went viral. There have been 80,000 packets distributed in the past 6 months across the country. So conversations at middle schools and at cities all over asking this. Quite honestly, they weren't ready for that demand. She's part of networks. So at the Community Foundation, she asked us, will you sponsor an event to teach the city about human trafficking? This is a dark subject. So we sort of took a breath and said, yes, okay, we'll do this. But we didn't know what the response would be. The response was amazing. All of the donors that we work with in foundations wanted to know more. So we took a bus ride with Children at Risk to go see where this happens in our city. And a year later, you've got a working group that's deployed $1 million in grants, and probably more importantly, got Mayor Parker to appoint the first special advisor against human trafficking, making real policy change. So transformation is about incredibly good grant making that has a lot of research behind it. It's about using your networks, you know, your social capital, your human capital. It's about taking that talent that you have and using that for change. So it's much more than just finances. And you know, that sounds large scale, and maybe that's a little scary because this is big grant making, but transformation can also happen with small gifts, but it's really about leverage and collaboration and very thoughtful strategic focus. And that's what we're seeing in all generations. Donors are getting more interested in doing big things.
I have a comment. Could I do that?
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting watching donors over the years, and I've seen a lot of people that want to get involved in the organization and make this transformational gift. I have to tell the story of the man that's name is on our building, George Lindahl. I mean, George wouldn't mind because his name's on the building, but George came to Bill Cassell, came to me several years ago and said, I have been very blessed, and I want to invest in your organization. Now, it just didn't happen like that. We cultivated, we worked with George, we got him involved, and George is a unique donor because George wanted to get in behind the scenes and see what we really do. And we had no idea where this was going. And so George would call me and say, could you take me into the back of one of your locations? I want to meet the people. I want to see what you're doing. And I thought that was powerful. And then one day he came to us and he basically said, I have been blessed. I could give a lot of gifts to many organizations, or I could make a transformational gift, an investment in your organization, believing in the leadership of the organization is key. But social impact. He gave the investment and is thrilled when we can show him the results, the social impact in our community. And that's the blessing of transformational giving.
Well, that feeds into my next question for you, which is really about what you're doing and what you think other nonprofits are doing to make sure that, that the boards of directors, the staff, and donors are all aligned around the same purpose and trying to accomplish the same things.
Keeping everybody on the same page is not always easy because you see all these different audiences at different times. Social media helps, but a lot of our board and a lot of our donors aren't on social media. If they're on social media, they're going, yay, look what y'all are doing, because we're posting something every day just like you guys are. But the other side of that is we have to make sure that our message is consistent, our brand is powerful, and so we have to train and keep that information before not only our board, but make sure our staff are saying the same thing, and make sure our donor is receiving the same message. What I don't want to happen, and I've seen this before in my career, not with this organization, with others, of course, but I've seen a message go to the donor, a message go to the board, and a message go to the staff. And our job as leaders in not-for-profits is to try to put all those messages into one so that we can communicate boldly what we're trying to do and what the impact of our community is based on the support that you would give to the organization that you choose.
Renee, I saw you nodding. Are you thinking
Yeah,
something?
I agree. I mean, alignment is so important. When we consult with organizations and businesses and donors, it's all about alignment. And people recognize if you're not being transparent. So transparency and alignment, I think, are really important. The only other thing I would add is feedback loops. I feel like that's so important that we hear from the people that we're serving. We just did the most exhaustive donor survey that we've ever done as a foundation. And we got so many great insights from that we're going to put into practice, because ultimately every organization is serving some kind of stakeholder, and we need to listen to them and incorporate their feedback.
You, building on that, and also going back to what you were saying about donors focusing, have you also seen a trend where donors are making gifts more like investors and shareholders and looking for some kind of measurable return? And what does that look like?
Absolutely. I think we're seeing that from everyone. Companies, certainly with their philanthropic investments, want to see a return, want to be able to show measurement. Individuals, families, everyone is focused on results. And I think, that can be scary for nonprofits to a degree. They can be afraid of that, and it's so important to be transparent about what you can measure and what kind of results you can provide and what can't be measured, and really have honest conversations about that. I think people appreciate that. One quick story that I think illustrates, how results can inspire donors. Most people probably know that Maureen and Jim Hackett have been really working on mental health care for a long, long time and doing great things to support institutions in Houston. They were really ready to fund a game-changing concept, and so they have this mental health awareness fund at the foundation, and they ended up partnering with two filmmakers who came to them with an idea that then they vetted and went back and forth on, and it's now the Mental Health Channel. So this is a channel like a YouTube or a Netflix that has content on mental health, over 100 episodes. It's been seen in 180 countries and has had 2 million views in 7 months. And it is transforming the national conversation on mental health so that people can understand it's okay to seek treatment. So this has so inspired them, and the results have been so fantastic and way beyond every benchmark that they set for the project, that now they want to raise $100 million over the next 4 years to focus on game-changing ideas in the mental health field. So results really inspire donors. And obviously, they're not always going to be that dramatic as the story I've just talked about. But I think any result that can be shared and is measurable is really going to help donors. And even if it's a small amount they're giving, an annual report that demonstrates the outcomes of an organization really helps donors feel confidence that the money that they're giving is being used in an effective way.
Kim, can I add on to that? The thing that's interesting for not-for-profit leaders is we have to be aware of the giver, of the donor, of what they're doing, because I have been tested. I have seen people who have researched our organization and began to give substantial smaller gifts, but they do it a lot. And so here's the challenge that we have as not-for-profit leaders, for those of you in the room. We have to catch that, because if we don't catch it and capitalize on it, that donor will move on to someplace else. I have some incredible, wonderful friends involved in the organization who said to me, I'm so glad you called. I'm so glad that you saw this in a year, because I had been watching Goodwill or watching whatever organization it is that you choose, and I wanted to invest in it. And so I started giving small gifts to see if you were watching. We have to be watching. This particular person has given substantial money in smaller increments throughout a 10-year period and is on the ground as a volunteer at our organization, touching the lives of the people that we serve. He loves impact, and he loves to see the social impact, but more importantly, he loves to be a part of the social impact, and we love that in our organizations.
Well, and he's having a qualitative experience that's very important to him.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of nonprofits get caught up in counting things, and counting things is not exactly the same thing as measuring impact, as Renee could tell us. So, Renee, how do you see millennials and next-gen donors factoring into philanthropy today? How is that shifting? How do you see that in your organization?
Wow, it is a wonderful force and a huge source of energy for those of us who are ready to embrace it. It has been an amazing ride for us to engage next-gen donors. That was the number one thing our donors said they wanted to see us do, was engage their children and grandchildren, because quite honestly, Houston has got such a great philanthropic tradition that I think everyone wants to know, is that going to carry on for the future? And so we organically started this Next Gen Donor Committee in 2011 that's now become a full-fledged leadership institute. So, 2016, we have 75 alumni who've been through a year-long program on giving, where they learn about strategic giving, they learn about the needs of great nonprofits, they go out and see nonprofits, they develop a giving plan, and they want so much more. I mean, they want advising, they want to know how to be effective on boards, they want to know how to make good giving decisions. They're really looking for meaning. And they will tell us all the time, and we've learned so much from them, that social hour is not enough, and lots of nonprofits start with kind of cocktail hour for young people, and they're like, we have friends. We're not looking really for more friends. We want to make a difference. So they really want to be engaged seriously. And for us, that's really changed our whole model at the foundation, and we have an entire Center for Family Philanthropy that we've launched to respond to the needs of donors who want to engage their children, their grandchildren in giving, because everyone's starting in philanthropy early and earlier, and all the research is saying that the earlier you engage your children, the more likely it's going to be a lifelong habit. So we've seen millennials just be a fantastic resource, and I think the only advice I would give nonprofits is you have to really be ready for their energy and for their leadership, and same thing with businesses. If you're going to embrace them, anybody can recognize window dressing. They don't want to just be thought of as those young people. They want a seat at the table, so you got to be ready for that.
We started working with the young professionals. Many of these are donors, as you just mentioned, and their families have been involved, and their families really want them to get involved in the organization. They may not want to do that. They may have their own interests, so we understand that. But trying to capture this group of energy is exciting to us. Our board has embraced that we really want to work on that next generation of people for board leadership, to get them involved in the organization, and to begin to cultivate them as they grow in their careers. May not have a lot of money yet, but one day they might. They might not be family money. They may be earning that money from day one and moving forward. It's a great thing, and you've got to do more than, so, like you said, cocktail parties. But that's a great way to get started, to get to know them. And then, for instance, we've got a gala that we do. We brought in 3 YP chairs. And so we're just kind of sitting back and watching, and their ideas are a lot different than mine. I used to be young. And when I was young, we had all this exciting stuff going on. The challenge we have as leaders in all organizations is, how do we get that next group in that you don't necessarily hang out with every day? And you've got to be open to that. And frankly, they bring in a breath of fresh air, and they're a lot of fun. We're having a great time.
So speaking of engagement, corporate giving represents only 5% of the money that's given away in America, but corporate partnerships with nonprofits can be really profound. And some of that is about employee engagement and volunteerism and things like that. Have you had any experience with that at Goodwill?
Yeah, it's one of the newest things going on out in the world right now. Large, for instance, foundations that may be nationwide are trying to do the social impact. How do we employ more people and get them trained, ready for the next step in their life, the bigger job than just starting here? And so one of the biggest in our country right now that's doing this really has stepped out is the Walmart Foundation. And the Walmart Foundation has created what they call Operation Good Jobs. And not just jobs, good jobs. And so they have used organizations throughout the country, we're one, that train people for that next level to get them ready to go in with, and then our job is collaborative partnerships with the community colleges, the University of Houston downtown, so that it's not just like in our world a Goodwill certificate. It's a certificate from Goodwill for this particular training from the University of Houston Downtown Institute for Retail, for instance. But they do want results. And I love that because they hold us accountable. And it's not just at the end of the project. It's throughout. They have monthly calls to find out where we stand, what our results are. And frankly, I like that because it holds my staff accountable as well. So I do think these new collaborative efforts and the organizations that want to see good. I mean, remember the days when I would just get a check from people way back in the 80s and the 90s. We'd get checks and just say, do good work. I still get some of those, but not as much. Now it's, we want to impact this. Can you help us? And so it's an interesting world, and I like where we are today. I've liked it then as well. But I'm trying to change with the world, and it's a good thing.
Renee, do you see any corporate partnership kinds of things?
Yeah,
happening?
lots of them. And I mean, there's so many incredible examples. And overall, we're seeing more partnership between companies and nonprofits. I mean, some great examples like Upskill Houston, where the partnership is involved with so many nonprofits trying to help with middle school jobs, and Early Matters, and what the Bush Literacy Foundation is doing. All of those large collective impact initiatives are involving the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, you know, all stakeholders together trying to make a difference. So I think we've got great examples of that across the community.
Well, you see the GHP getting involved, saying education is a big thing. Like, we need an educated workforce. So you see that as an organization really making
And you
a
know,
big
Kim, it's also like the organizations that do volunteer days. I mean, I can think of Deloitte. My former board chair, Bill, was with Deloitte forever. And Deloitte comes in and does stuff all over the community, other not-for-profits. And our job is to connect them and get them hooked in to the good that's happening.
So I wonder if you could each comment, maybe Renee first, on whether you've seen an impact of $30 oil on what's happening in your organization, and
You know, truthfully, we will probably have less gifts coming into the foundation because people may not be having a lot of appreciated securities, which drives a lot of our giving. But the grant making will continue to thrive because what we see is Houstonians are incredibly generous, and when there's great times of need, they still want to make grants. And because they've placed money with us and it's there and they can give it at the pace that they want, we may well see an uptick in grant making to respond to the need that Houstonians have. And that'll be great for the community. So I think money is still going to be flowing to nonprofits. Our assets may down a bit, but will be down a little bit, but that's fine. You know, it's really important that money get to the nonprofits that need it.
Steve?
I remember one of my dear oil and gas friends who said to a few of us about 10 years or so ago, he said, "It's amazing what you can get done when oil is at $60 a barrel." Little did we know what was going to happen and then where we are today. And so our job is to make sure that we can sustain through those rough days. We have not seen an impact yet. We also don't rely heavily for our operating budget on fundraising. That is done through a self-sufficiency model that Goodwill has. But we haven't seen the gifts drop off yet. And we really hope that that does not happen because ours are program specific. We want you to support a program. And so far, we have not seen that occur.
You may see creativity for companies coming up in terms of they won't be able to give what they've been giving if they're laying off people, if their bottom line is really hurt. So I think that's where really thinking hard about employee engagement is going to make so much sense. And we've seen companies do a great job of letting their employees sponsor projects and do community projects. Spectra Energy in 1 year alone had 440 community projects that employees and retirees did. I mean, so all the companies are going to need to be thinking about how can they mobilize their people if they can't mobilize their dollars in the same way. And quite honestly, that's going to help build employee morale and do good.
And all those employees also make their own giving decisions.
Yes, yes.
So they're going to step up too.
Yeah, I mean, we have one company, Hillcore Energy, that most of you may know allows their company employees to make all of their giving decisions. And so they have an individual donor advised fund for every single employee, and it's all self-directed and matched by the company. Most companies don't want that much employee control. It's a unique model, and Jeff Hildebrand is a unique leader. But for them, that's a recruiting edge for engineers, is the fact that they have this amazing giving program.
Awesome. We want to leave some time for people in the room to ask questions, but I wonder if there's anything that's on your minds that we haven't touched on that you think really deserves to be discussed.
Well, I can always come up with something when I get that question. And I know that we have a lot of great people in this room that do a lot of good things through your service on not-for-profit boards and other boards as well. It's important in our world to make sure that we provide the leadership that you want. But the other side of that is we need to train our new board in their roles. And frankly, I think that sometimes in the past, not-for-profits haven't done that well. I do think we're doing a lot better than we used to. A proper orientation, an availability to answer questions. Because what I always tell my staff is they'll go, how come the board doesn't understand that? And I'll say to them, the reason is because they only live in our world in and out. We're in it all day long. And so you have to make it easier for them to understand when they walk back in to grab that page to get updated, even if they're an involved board member. It's not necessarily their priority, where it's my priority every day. Anyway, so serving on boards, thank you, all of you, for serving on boards and committing your time, especially for not-for-profit boards in our community.
Renee?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Every person in this room is serving and making a difference. And I think that's what everyone wants to do with their time and with their money, is make a difference. And I think whether people are giving $100 or $1 million, they want that to have an impact. And sometimes we can think, okay, we don't have that much to give. But truly, people can make a big impact with small dollars. And sometimes that means giving with others. It's not just about what you can do yourself, but what can you do with other people that you know, and how can you make a bigger impact that way. And so that can be, seem new to people and maybe even risky, but that would be the only other takeaway I would give, is that risk is really important in philanthropy. We're not going to solve problems without new ideas. And so being willing to take some calculated risks and try things that haven't been proven yet, I mean, that's what's really going to make a difference, and it's important to think about that.
And since strategy really is a board level responsibility, you want board members who won't agree with each other on every single thing, right? Having
Absolutely.
a little bit of healthy discussion is a very, very good thing in board meetings.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Debate.
So we have a question from the floor for Steve, and one person would like to hear you talk about the change in your business model, how you accomplished that, and what impact it's had on your operations.
Changing a business model in any business, profit or not-for-profit, is never easy, because it's hard to get everyone to jump on the same ship. And so, we needed to make a change in our organization, because what we had done since 1945 wasn't working anymore. The world changed, the city got bigger. And so my board was very supportive of this change because we needed to get it done. We actually looked at things, will we be in business in 10 years if we don't make this change? And there was a point where we felt that maybe we would not be. And so we had to go begin studying other successful models of Goodwills that were a little ahead of the curve than I was. And I will tell you, the hardest part for me was change. The reason is I'm a second-generation Goodwill person. The things that I had learned back in the 60s as a kid growing up weren't the same in 2000. And so luckily our board felt the same way. So we went out and looked at best practices. And then we had to get everybody on the same bus, and that was tough, man. I mean, some of our board was not willing to do that, but more importantly, some of our staff wasn't willing to do that. And so the ones that really didn't want to do that left, and we got new people that really believed in what we were doing. Our job was, we want to be sustainable. We want to make sure there's a future in goodwill. And we could do that by raising, if you would, capital through donations. Kim, thank you to you and your team for assisting Goodwill in doing that. And it was a process of about 5 years. And what we found as we met with all of these incredible people throughout the community, business owners, foundations, and private individuals, is they had to gamble a little bit on me to make sure that we were really going to do what we said we'd do. And then once we turned the corner and began to get this self-sustaining model working, they loved it. I remember Houston Endowment, for instance, really, they're wonderful. They just don't give you money. I mean, they really have to see what's going on. And they came to us and said, we have not really ever seen a model that's self-sufficient like this. We love it, and we believe in it, and we want to support it. So I hope I answered your question. Change is not easy. I like today where I was compared to back then, from cash flow and from any other things. But the beauty of it, as we change, you've got to also change and increase your mission and purpose, not just sustainability. We have to serve more people. We want to do more good. And I think we've done that in the community, and we're continuing to. We're challenged every day to do that.
Well, and for those that don't know, what that meant for Goodwill was building stores all across Houston and raising money and spending it on that, on the expectation that they could generate money by selling everything through those stores. So it wasn't for sure until it got done.
It wasn't easy. We went from about 10 to 15 locations throughout the city, stores, and we had to put them in different communities, different neighborhoods. We had to change our brand. Developers didn't want us in their centers. Now they do. They approach us. We have 60 stores. We have about 54 donation centers on top of that, located conveniently through the city, and then 9 job connection centers where we actually perform our mission each day. And it's been a blessing, and we're continuing to grow. We have made a decision as a board. Let's hold back a little bit right now, slow down our growth, and make sure that we can carry through this wave that's going on right now. So we're happy, and I think we're set up in a good way to handle whatever comes.
Renee, I wonder if you've seen a change, and this is another question from the room, in the way that nonprofit board oversight has changed in the past 5 years. I think we've seen in our organization that nonprofits can rock along with a good, strong CEO until times get tough. And that's when you really need a board, and you can't put a strong board into place overnight. And I wonder if you've seen anything about oversight and the role of the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point. Building a board takes a long time, and board members want to be engaged, and having a great dynamic between the leader and the board is incredibly important. I think transparency from the CEO or leader of the organization to the board goes a long way in building an effective board, but it's a pipeline. It has to be nurtured through a nominations committee. There's got to be ongoing conversations about recruiting and bringing people into the organization. Most people today are not going to join a board cold. They're going to want to have experienced that organization. They want to know it. They want to have been involved. They want to have some sense that it's effective before they decide they're going to commit their time and their brand, quite honestly, to an organization. So I think, effective nonprofit leaders really are cultivating their boards over time, and they're not just thinking about it 1 or 2 years in advance. They're really looking long-term at the pipeline for the board. And the other thing is, it can be hard if an organization is doing so well. Sometimes it doesn't seem like there's a real role for the board. And so that's also the question is, people want to be there to make a difference. And if the CEO and the leaders do too many things that prohibit real engagement or feel like they're not open to the advice of the board, then board members will get disengaged. So even when things are going well, really figuring out what are those key policy decisions that the board can be involved in. And fiduciary oversight is obviously a key role, but beyond that, how else can the board be helpful to the organization?
Well, and Steve, this is an interesting question for you because you've been in place for a long time. And so what is the role of the board? I mean, one of the key functions of the board is to oversee your employment and your performance and the financial performance of the organization and all these other things. How do you feel about that when you've been doing a good job for a long time.
Because I have board members in here, I love it. Now, really, let me just kind of share my thoughts on that. Back when I first started my career, I had an executive committee who was reviewing me, and they said to me, and I was in my 30s, they said, "You never engage your board." And I heard that. I've never forgotten it. And it's hard sometimes when you're running every day trying to keep the organization going to engage. I really think we have done a better job, and I'll give Bill Cassell, who's here, some compliments today, because as our chairman of the board, he helped us reform the governance and activity of our board. We look at it like any other board would, a profit-making company. We have committee structures. Our committees are active. We're involved in those things. And before, we really didn't have much structure. And so there's committee reports at every board meeting. How are we doing? What are we doing? But it's a great way to engage members who want to have a purpose, and that gives them that piece over there where they can help me build the organization, and I can help them build the organization that they love.
And what about advisory boards? This is another question. Good question somebody asked. Are advisory boards just there so that you have a closer group to send underwriting letters to, or are they there to perform a function? And what is that? And how do you manage yet another group? Renee, you want to
Yeah,
start?
I mean, I think it's a challenge, but I think, it's one that can be overcome, but it has to be really clear what the responsibilities are for the advisory board. And, I think in all advisory boards, there's some people who are there just to lend their name, and that's okay, and some who are there to be actively engaged. We're excited. A bunch of members of our advisory board are going to be on our scholarship review committee this year, and I think this is going to be a really great hands-on way for them to feel a connection, because they're going to be helping make decisions about who gets scholarships, which will be just really impactful. So I think there have to be, other ways to involve the advisory committee that gets them close to your cause and makes them really feel like they're making an impact. But it has to be more than just another group you ask money for.
I've struggled with this my entire career because you have a group of advisory members, and many back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, just like name. We were happy to have their name on that list. And then the world began to change, and people really wanted impact. I started hearing comments from former board of director members who shifted over to the board of trustees advisory group when they rotated off the board, and they would say, okay, you've kind of put me out the pasture, now I'm not doing anything. And it was a challenge. How do we do that? And we're still working through this. So let me just tell you, we have decided that 2016 is our year to really try to revamp this and get a hold of it. We have the chair of that particular committee's here, Bob Shaw, over in the back. Bob, thank you. Bob is taking this on this year with other trustees and other people that aren't trustees, maybe on an advisory council or something like that, to try to figure out what is the purpose, what is their real meaning, and why do we have that board of trustees? And I think it's going to turn out to be exciting. I've tried to have them run the achievement dinner. I've tried to have them run and be responsible for the gala. That didn't work. So we've had to do other things. And so it's a struggle. And Bob, it's all in your court now for 2016.
I'd suggest, based on our experience, that two organizations, AIDS Foundation Houston and HSPVA Friends, two completely different groups, do a great job with their advisory boards. They make sure that, that they don't just email them, but they bring them together at least twice a year. They have substantive discussions at those meetings. They ask members of the advisory board to serve on board committees so that they can really, if they need their expertise, so that they're really there for a reason, because they're bringing something that the organization needs to draw on. But they don't have to come to every board meeting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that face-to-face engagement, at least once or twice a year, is critical. They want to know what the organization is doing, and so they need that update, and they need to give input.
And sometimes you need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Renee, do you see trends? You shared that lovely pie chart of where your donor advised funds are going and where you're distributing. Has that changed over time, or is it remaining pretty constant between the different sectors?
It changes for a couple of things. One, I mean, when there's a disaster, obviously we'll see a lot more giving going towards human services for that reason. When there is a really large capital campaign, like we had so many donors helping to build the paleontology wing at the Museum of Natural Science, we'll see more money going towards the arts for that. Otherwise, the only trend we've been seeing over time is education has been increasing, and that's university giving, but it's also K through 12, it's also scholarships, it's charter schools, it's other organizations that support education. So that's been one that we've been seeing on the rise for the past several years.
Interesting. Steve, I wonder if you could talk about volunteerism. One of our guests today wanted to know, how do you create meaningful volunteer opportunities? And how do you manage volunteers? And how do you find ways that they can plug in to do things that are meaningful but are also helpful to you?
Well, there are several different types of volunteers. In our world, we have, and I'm assuming none of you are involved in this, we have court-ordered volunteers. And so court-ordered volunteers, we appreciate working with them, but I have to have somebody on my staff that just deals with the court-ordered calls. But then we have the volunteer that just wants to volunteer, and it may be the Kincaids, it may be the high school, the junior high, or the family. And so what we do is we try to put them into one of our mission side. Most people don't want to come and sort old clothes. Those are for the court-ordered volunteers. But what we do is we'll take you to a job connection center, for instance, our Veterans Center down in Midtown, where we work just with all veterans, men and women, but post-Iraq, Afghanistan young men and women who need some real help. And this is a great place to come in and give your expertise to a group of people that are really willing to hear what you have to say. Money management, budgets, dressing for success, all of the things that maybe they don't understand. So there's a way to get involved, to use your expertise, not just to come and sort stuff, to come and give and touch and instruct and then help them, to be a mentor at an organization. There's a lot of people that need you to tell them and to show them the way it is out in the business world.
Renee, any comments?
Yeah, I think our most interesting challenge regarding volunteers lately is that we have whole families who want to volunteer together. So we've been really focused in the last year on how do we create family giving days. And there, it's an interesting challenge. What is a 5-year-old going to do with their grandparent? But surprisingly enough, there are plenty of nonprofits who really will work with young children and find ways for them to understand what they're doing. And even just this last June, our whole staff volunteered with our children at Interfaith Ministries on their, Meals on Wheels program for pets. And the kids, really were impacted learning about the fact that seniors sometimes have to choose between eating a meal and feeding their pet. And so, we spent 2 hours cleaning up this whole room and packing pet food. And, at the end of the day, they were able to tell us what that was going to do for how many people were going to be able to have pet meals. And it was a great experience. So I think that's one of the trends nonprofits are going to be seeing more and more with volunteers, is people wanting to come as whole families and really getting ready for that.
And plant the seed when they're young. Mm-hmm. I mean, we work with a group, I love this, little Cub Scouts come in every year. They've adopted the organization, and they come in and provide toiletries and gifts, and they have a little drive within their pack. And they come out and they assist some of the most probably severely disabled individuals in our community that need that. And it's just, they'll never forget that. Mm-hmm. And one day they'll remember, hey, we did that when we were little, and they'll make an impact on organizations throughout our community. And I love that.
Well, and you're both touching, I think, lightly on a trend that has absolutely occurred in the volunteer world, and that is people like to come and get it done and then go home.
Right.
Yes.
They don't want to come every week on Wednesday at 10 o'clock anymore. They want to come and do something that's really meaningful, often with their families or people that they work with, and then finished. So if you can find just one-time opportunities, I think it's a good thing. One question is, one person has asked all three of us, in our experience, and this might be a good wrap-up question, what are the 2 to 3 things that nonprofits should focus on in the next 5 years? So I'll jump and offer a couple things and give you a minute to think. I think one is have a strategic plan. It is shocking how many nonprofits jump out to build buildings and do other things like that without a strategic plan. So I think it's really important, and I think the process of creating that plan is as important as the product that emerges from it. But if you have a good plan in place, and that's a board level activity, then everybody in the organization can be aligned the way that you were saying before. Like, what are you in business to do? Where are you? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? What's it going to cost? Who's doing what? So I'll just throw that out there as one thing, and why don't we just go around a couple times and then
You want to go?
Sure.
wrap.
I think they need to be thinking about collaboration. It's become a real expectation that organizations not think of themselves as doing their work alone. And so getting over our fear of that and really looking at what other organizations they can collaborate with for more impact. And obviously they should be thinking about their donors. Who are they now? Who do they want them to be in the future? And how are they going to engage that next generation?
Well, I think Renee hit it where we needed to get over, as not-for-profits, our turf wars. We used to have them. I didn't want to get in their turf. They didn't want to deal with me. I think now that we're all in this thing together, and we know that some organizations have more strengths than others, and so we need to continue this collaboration, not only with businesses and corporations, but with other not-for-profits in the community. We can get more done if we just get over ourselves, and we're doing that. And I appreciate all my fellow not-for-profit folks out in the world for doing that. The part about the strategic plan, Craig Nunes is a member of this group, and he happens to be the chair of our strategic planning committee. And so ours is a 5-year process, a 5-year plan that we begin this year as we're at the end of our strategic plan. You've got to have a vision, because I've always had one, but many times I was the only one that shared that vision, and I want to make sure that our board feels the same way. And then what's so neat is our staff also takes their goals and then creates their own strategic plan under that to get to that goal, which I appreciate a lot. But the other part is cultivation. We have to continue to keep young people involved. I really feel strongly about that because I was the guy when I was 27, 28. Look at all these old people on the board. And they were, my age or younger. And so all of a sudden, I'm one of those guys now. And we have to continue to keep that. And then diversity is a challenge. Let's continue to work on diversity in our boards throughout the community. So I think not-for-profits are going in a right direction. I think our city, I couldn't be in a more fun city, right? I mean, we've got a lot going on. Right now, it's a little weird in this city, but it will get better, and we'll be on top again. So
I'll offer that we should take care of leadership, that
Yeah.
the board is responsible for hiring,
Yeah.
taking care of, sometimes not, letting a CEO go. But you lose so much when you have high turnover at that top job. It takes a year to recover from that kind of a transition. Often everybody just has to march in place. So finding the right CEO and taking care of them is, I think, incredibly important. And only the board can manage the board. The board's responsible for, for nominating and organizing its own work and taking care of its own performance and evaluating that performance. And neither of those things are urgent. They're really important. And then they can become urgent when you have a problem. So I think that is a very important intentional area of responsibility.
Well, and in the next 5 years, investment in talent is going to be really important because there is kind of a generational change coming in leadership in many organizations, and all the data is saying that we are not going to have enough talented nonprofit leaders. So really thinking about succession planning is going to be another key to that.
The number of nonprofits has doubled in 12 years.
Yeah.
So how many people have 10 years experience? How many people have the number of years that you have?
The bench strength is something that we continue to focus on. We have to. Because I have seen in my career so many of our top leadership leave. And so we always have to have that next group. And then I think as the leader of an organization, our obligation to our board is to make sure that we have a plan ready, a succession plan when something happens to us or whatever that is. And so that's a challenge to all of us to make sure we have that.
I think that's probably a good way to wrap it. I'd like to thank everybody for being here, and I know that we'll be around for a few minutes after if anyone would like to